Welcome to the Painting Coach, and today we are painting the brand new, disgusting Lord of Poxes model for the Death Guard. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending me this model early so I can get started on the filth. Let's get painting. Now, I've primed this model with Hyrax Brown first, and then with Ossified Earth, both from Colourforge. Now, the Ossified Earth is the same as Morghast Bone from Citadel, so you can use that, but we're going to lighten it up a little bit. So if you've got something like Xandri Dust, you could use that as well. The first thing I'm going to do is stipple some white all over this model in the areas where I've got highlights, and paying particular attention to that murky cloak that the model's wearing. So you can use whatever white that you've got. I'm using AK white, and I'm using one of my Artist Opus Series D dry brushes to get this stippled across the model. Like I said, focusing on the areas that catch the most light. Once you've done that, you can see we've got a nice little transition. Of course, if you've got an airbrush, you could use that as well instead of the stippling. So I'm going to base all of the armor next, and the color I'm using for that is Militarum Green contrast paint, which is my favorite base color for Death Guard armor. And all I'm going to do is paint this all across those panels. Now, it's worth saying you can be fairly messy with this, but when you come to areas that are going to be lighter, such as that cloak and around some parts of the backpack, it is worth taking your time and just being a little tidier. Now, before we start this next step, it's really important that everything is completely dry. So if you're not sure, wait a little bit longer. We're going to go back to stippling, and the color we're going to use is Elysian Green. And what we're looking to do here is just stipple across all of the armor, focusing on the areas that are going to get the most light. And this is a good step because we'll start to work out some of the kinks in the contrast paint. So perhaps in some areas where it's a little bit blotchy or it's a little bit heavy, you can really work it out using this stippling technique. So just keep going until we've got a nice smooth transition. Next up, we're going to go to Ogryn Camo, and I'm going to use a slightly smaller dry brush for this. Again, I'm sticking with my Series D, and I'm going to focus this much more across those areas that are going to catch the most light. So I'm working across the helmet, the side of the chest plate, and across the knee and the foot of the model. So again, with this stippling motion, it should enable you to get a nice, decent highlight. Now, I mentioned that I'm using my Series D dry brushes from Artist Opus. I'm actually using a D+, which is a slightly bigger set of brushes, and these are mine. If you want to pick up your own, use the link in the description and use the code TPC to get 5% off your order. I've had these for over a year. I use them all the time, and they still work absolutely perfectly fine, despite a little bit of staining. You can buy the box set, and you get a dampening pad and some brush soap as well, and using my link does support the channel. I get a small kickback at no additional cost to you. Moving on then, let's add a little bit of an edge highlight to the armor, and the color I'm using for this is Krieg Khaki. Now, what I'm looking to do here is make sure I've got a little bit on my brush and just drag it across all of the edges to get a nice fine highlight. Now, this should go really nicely with the Ogryn Camo underneath. We don't want to go overboard, just build it up nicely to start with, and then if you feel you need to add some more, you can always go back in. I'm also going to use this to pick out some of the dents and the dinks and the cracks in the armor. Next up, it's time to really dirty up the model a little bit. So I'm going to take some Ratling Grime, and I'm going to mix up a 2-to-1 contrast medium and Ratling Grime mix. So this will make it nice and thin. Then without too much on my brush, I'm going to brush it all over the armor and all over that white cloak, or what's going to be that white cloak. The key with this is not to let it pull too heavily into any of the recesses. We're really just looking to give it a tint whilst we do work it into the deeper areas. So you've just got a little bit of contrast in the armor. When it comes to that cloak as well, we don't want to put it on too heavily. We just want to get the recesses shaded. Once that's completely dry, we're going to put a second coat on, but only on the white cloak area. So again, we're focusing this into the recesses just to really build up the dirt and grime. And we are focusing it more towards the bottom of the cloak, which is where it's going to be dragging across the ground and things like that. So just get it on there. Again, not too heavy a coat. Next up, we'll paint that big sack that he's got covering the backpack, and it's got all of that machinery concealed. So the color we're going to use for this is Agrax Earthshade. Again, it's a contrast paint, so just work it across all of those areas. Now, we're going to have to be a little bit careful, particularly when we come up against the armor, because we don't want to spill any of it on the green. It doesn't matter so much if we spill it on the leather or on the mechanical parts, because we're going to paint over them later. So just take your time with this. There's a lovely, nice brown for leather. Okay, so let's highlight up that white cloth next. Now, if you look at the box art, it's quite a bright white at the top and a dirty grey white at the bottom. And that Ratling Grime is kind of a browny grey colour, so we're going to leave that in the recesses. And what we're looking to do is take some Eshin Grey and just paint this across the lower part of the cloak, leaving the Ratling Grime in the depth. Now, the Ratling Grime is darker than the Eshin Grey, so this is kind of a bit of a backwards way of doing this, but it is going to look quite nice in the end. So if you're not sure what to paint, just watch the video and use this. So we're not painting it over the Ratling Grime in the recesses, we're painting it over the lighter parts, and we'll highlight them up nicely as we carry on. Next up, we'll take some Dawnstone. And again, this is just a lighter grey, so we're building that colour transition from the bottom to the top into a lighter colour. So what we're looking to do across the bottom areas where we've got pure Eshin Grey is we're looking to just highlight these, dragging the brush down the shape of the model. When it comes to the lighter parts on the shoulder pad and under the sword on the back, we're looking to just paint huge areas, leaving the darker colours in the recess, and this will just help us with that transition. So again, don't go overboard when you come to the kind of bit where you want to get a transition. Just take your time and work it in slowly. If you need to put a bit more Eshin Grey on just to go over where you have that transition, it should go quite nicely over the Dawnstone. Next up, we're going to take some Administratum Grey, and again, we're going to start painting this towards the top of that cloak. So we've got areas, again, along the shoulder pad and underneath where that sword is. These are going to be our lighter areas. So we're going to be painting more of an area highlight again inside the Dawnstone from the previous step. So just take your time with this and build that colour up. Now, it doesn't cover fantastically well, which really does help when it comes to making this transition work. The final highlight we'll do is with some Corax White. Now, this is a little bit of an off-white and is quite bright, but don't worry about that too much because as it dries, it will blend in. And if you need to, you can just take some more Administratum Grey and work it around just to ease that transition. But really with this, we're just looking for the sharpest edges across the top of the shoulder pad and the sharpest folds around the back. Whilst I've got that Corax White out, I'm also going to paint all of the tubing that we've got on the model. So we've got a little bit around the mask, but we've got some particularly clear tubing going from the chest into the belly and also around the shoulders and under from the backpack. I'll also paint the eye lenses and the plasma coil. So we'll highlight up the sack on the backpack next. And the first colour I'm going to use this is Doombull Brown. Now I'm going to use this in a stippling motion. Now the area is a little bit too confined for using a dry brush here. So I am just going to use a normal brush. And whilst I'm stippling, I am leaving that Agrax in the recesses and picking up those raised areas where you've got some folds or you've got the material going over metallic parts. So making sure I cover all of the edges. And instead of bringing my brush in nice smooth motions, I'm just tapping it across the model. Now, the paint is a little bit thin, so thin it with a little bit of water, and that'll help it blend down as it dries. The next highlight is with Lord Brown. Now again, we're using that same tapping motion to highlight the edges, so it does give you a little bit of a stippling effect. And again, as it dries, it's going to blend down. What we're looking to do with the Lord Brown is really focus this on those raised areas and those raised folds, so it should be fairly easy to identify them and just tap your brush along them to build up a nice highlight. The final highlight is with some Xandri dust, and what we're looking to do is keep this inside the Lord Brown of the previous stage. Again, we're going to be doing exactly the same technique, but rather than dragging our brush across the area, we're going to be tapping our brush across it. And this will just give us that nice stippled highlight, which just makes it look a little bit messier, a little bit more worn, and a little bit more aged. And that just adds to the overall Death Guard aesthetic. For all of the leather and any black tubing, I'm going to cover this using some Black Legion contrast paint. Now, you don't have to use contrast paint for this. You can use just normal black paint, but I like the Black Legion contrast paint because it covers fantastically well. For the fleshy tubing that we've got going down from the chest into the belly and around there, I'm going to take some Guilliman Flesh contrast paint. Now, you could probably use some Ratling Flesh shade here as well if you haven't got Guilliman Flesh, but I just want them to have a little bit of a fleshy tone. And I'm also going to use this across that material that we've got holding the canister on the front as well, because I want to make this look a little bit more fleshy than the rest of the cloak. For the fleshy tubes running down from the backpack into the canister and into the armor, I'm going to take some Volupous Pink contrast paint. I'm going to very carefully apply this because I don't want to spill this on any other areas I've already finished. Once this is completely dry, I'm going to go back in and add a second coat of Volupous Pink just to really give a nice solid colour. This next stage is a bit of an optional one, but I just think it adds a little bit more variation. I take some Berserker Bloodshade and just wash this into the recesses of that now fleshy pouch that I've got across the front of the model. It just makes it look that little bit more disgusting. To highlight the leather, we're going to use the same set of colours we used on the white cloak. So the first thing we're going to do is take some Eshin Grey. We're going to drag our brush along the sharp edges to get a nice crisp highlight. Take your time in areas you've already finished, and in some places you may need to just paint it in across the shape of the model. Key for this is a good point on your brush and not too much paint. To finish the leather highlighting, we'll take some Dawnstone, and again what we're looking to do here is get this inside the Eshin Grey from the previous step. So again, we're dragging our brush where we can to get those nice crisp highlights, and where we can't, we're just going to paint it in very carefully. Again, a good tip on your brush, not too much paint. To highlight those fleshy bits, we're going to take some Flayed One Flesh. Now, you don't need a huge amount of this. What we're looking to do is we're just looking to drag it and highlight them slightly so that we've got a nice crisp highlight, just so that it accentuates them and they don't get lost into that and looking like all one colour. For the tubes coming down from the backpack that we based with Volupous Pink, we're now going to take some Nuln Oil and we're going to cover these as well, being careful across areas we've already finished, of course. And this is just going to help darken them down a little bit. And we're going to focus this a little bit more towards the front of the model rather than the back. Once that's completely dry, we're going to take some Pink Horror and we're going to use this to highlight those tubes. Now, what we're looking to do here is just highlight all the ridges and folds and creases to just help them stand out a little bit. So you don't need a huge amount, but we do just want to give them a little bit more life and depth than they've already got at the moment. So if you're not sure, just check the box art and that'll kind of show you where some of the highlights are. Moving on to the metallics, we're going to base all of the gold and coppery colours first. So the colour I'm going to use for this is Balthasar Gold. And what I'm doing here is just painting things like the shoulder pad rims, the hilt of the sword, any trim on the armour, and some of the different elements, such as the spike on the helmet. Check the box art if you're not sure. Again, we've finished lots of the model now, so it's really important that we're careful at this stage. For some of the darker bronzy elements, I'm going to base these using Warplock Bronze. Now, this is a nice colour. It's a very, very dark copper, goldy colour. So just take your time, again, around those areas you've already finished. For the silver, I'm going to use some dark aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour. If you haven't got this, you can use Surcoat Silver or Lead Belcher. It's absolutely fine. And I'm going to paint all of the silver elements. So there's quite a bit, such as all the tubing on the back of the backpack. Obviously, there's that massive sword. And there's also some other elements, such as clips and pins and nails. And I'm also going to paint the plasma pistol body with this as well. Once you've finished all that, it's time to shade it. So I'm going to shade the copper and the silver with the same colour. I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade. And I'm just going to wash this across all of the areas. I'm not going to let it pool too heavily into the recesses because I don't want a massively dark area. So I am going to keep it moving and make sure that it doesn't go on too heavily. We'll highlight the silver first. Now, we are going to do some rust later on, so don't worry too much about getting nice crisp highlights across all of the silver. I'm just going to take some chrome from Vallejo Model Air and drag my brush along the sharp edges, particularly across the sword and across the plasma pistol. For the copper elements, I'm going to highlight those with Hashut Copper. Again, dragging my brush along those sharp edges to get a nice crisp finish. And this is going to give you a much more orangey coppery colour, which I think is going to look absolutely great. Next up, we'll add some verdigris to all of the copper and also the areas we painted with Warplock Bronze. So I'm using some Nihilakh Oxide for this. Now, the key here is not to have too much on your brush and just work it into some of the recesses and the creases, particularly around rivets and studs. Now, with this, what you'll find, it might go on quite bright, but as it dries, it'll start to blend in a bit more and you need to go back in to add a second shade. My advice for this is don't put too much on to start with because it's much easier to add more than it is to take away. So if you put too much on, it'll dry too powerfully and won't quite have that subtle effect. Next up, we'll add some rust. So we're focusing on things like the sword and silver elements, but we are also going to focus on some of the armor panels as well. Again, similar to the verdigris, so around rivets and in recesses and creases and things like that. So the color I'm using is Doombull Brown. Now this is very heavily thinned. It's probably 4 parts water to 1 part Doombull Brown. I haven't got a huge amount on my brush, but because it's so liquid, as soon as I touch it, it is going to flow. So one thing I'm looking to do is to get this into all of the creases where I want some rust. I'm also going to just tap my brush around some of the rivets, and I am going to drag it out slightly to get a little bit of rust staining and streaking on there as well. If you want to add patches of rust across things like the sword, you will need to just use a slightly thicker mix. And again, I'm just going to stipple this on with my brush. To enhance the rust and give the impression of some lighter streaks, I'm going to take some Skrag Brown. Again, I've thinned this down quite a bit. It's probably 3 parts water to 1 part Skrag Brown. Not a lot on my brush. And I'm going to paint this inside the Doombull Brown from the last stage. So this is going to give you different layers to your rust. So you'll have the fresher, lighter rust as opposed to the older, darker rust. So again, just tap your brush across the model, particularly across the pockmarked sword. You'll get some nice effects in there with the rest. And then also around the armor panels, around the rivets and things like that, you could also get a really nice rust effect. Next up, we will do the eye lenses and the plasma coil. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint them with a bright white. Now I'm using AK white. You can use whatever white that you prefer. I'm then going to take a little bit of Magmadroth Flame contrast paint and paint this over the eye lenses and over the plasma coil of the plasma pistol. Now this will give you a fairly decent base to get started with. I'm then going to mix a little bit of Magmadroth Flame into the white just to give me a very, very, very light orange. And I'm going to tap 2 dots across the lenses and just drag this a little bit into the recesses of that plasma coil as well. And there we have it. This Lord of Poxes is ready to spread disease across the tabletop. I'm really happy with how this has come out. Every time I paint a Death Guard model, it makes me want to paint more of them. So I am having to resist that urge. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like and a comment down below. Check out some of my other Death Guard content. It was the first video I ever did on the channel, and I'll see you next time.